All right, trying not to blast you out here. Maybe I need to. Next year, those chairs are going to be up here instead of in the back. But the topic of on-farm research, follow the K.I.S.S rule. We kind of been bashing you over the head with our interpretation. Nope, got to stand up here. Our interpretation of how we want to see on-farm research conducted. But again, this is emphasizing that we very much value on-farm research and the information that can come from it if that research is done correctly. And there's a lot of things that are done out in the field that are classified as research when it isn't actually research. Now, what is on-farm research versus demonstration? You've heard about that a couple of times here this morning. You're going to hear about it again. What is the K.I.S.S rule, and what do we have to watch out for that can cause an effort to do research to go down the tubes and become almost meaningless, and we have spent a lot of time, a lot of energy, and potentially a lot of money to conduct a research project on the farm. What's so special about on-farm research? Why would we want to undertake this process? There's really nothing different between what a university research project would do and what on-farm research would do. However, there are some limitations to what we can do on the farm. But if we do that on-farm research correctly, it is directly comparable to what the university research can accomplish as well. Some of the things that we are limited to, we won't be able to do nearly as many comparisons as what the university does on a small plot basis. We may be restricted as to what kind of treatments are done because it may take specialized equipment that is not currently available on the farm, or it may take a manipulation of a plot to get the best results out of it that we can do on a small plot basis, but we can't do it on a large scale on-farm basis. As an example there, one of the things that we have to be very careful of when it comes to looking at things like diseases or insects in a field crop situation is, in both cases, that organism that we are interested in isn't necessarily evenly distributed across an entire field. It may be very clumped in one spot or another. As a result of that, your replications of your on-farm research may miss those clumped types of organisms. And that will cause some skewed information to come out of a plot like that. Now, for example, somebody like Ann Dorrance, when she does her Phytophthora research on a small plot basis, she can manipulate that small plot research area by turning irrigation across the entire area to make sure that there's plenty of moisture available there such that the Phytophthora disease-causing organism is relatively evenly spread across her research area. You can't do that on a farm scale type of research plot. You can't get enough irrigation out into a plot to do that. So you're limited by some of the equipment. The other thing, and this probably is one of the bigger drawbacks of doing on-farm research, is when we need to plant those plots, those research areas, it's probably the same exact time that you're trying to plant the entire rest of the farm. And as a result of that, it's going to take time away from other efforts that you need to keep profitability going on at the farm. As a result of that, because it's conflicting in consuming the time that you need to plant everything else, it may get a lower priority. And if it gets a lower priority than the rest of the farm, it may not get done in a timely manner or at an appropriate time to get the best results out of it. However, the nice side about on-farm research is it is real time. It's real scenarios that we deal with on a regular basis on the farm. So you get a little bit more comfortable about the results that may come back from that type of research, because it's being done in your local area, it's being done in your soil types, it's being done under your weather conditions. And so you feel like, yeah, this really reflects what I want to see come out of research. The other thing is, what do we expect to get out of on-farm research? Well, obviously, just like any other type of research, whether it's university research, private company research, or your on-farm research, we're trying to answer a question. We're trying to get to whether something that we might adopt will really do what university research says it will do. And so we're verifying and answering that question on the farm. The other thing is, sometimes the question we have on the farm isn't necessarily a priority question as to what may be going on at the university level. So there may not be anybody else out there to do that research to get to that answer that we would like to see. We're validating the answers that we're seeing coming from the university, from small plot research. And it's a kind of an easy way to convince yourself that, yes, what we do at the university, even though it may be on a small plot basis, really does carry over to the on-farm situation. This is in contrast to on-farm demonstrations. On-farm demonstrations are not research. There's a lot of things that are lacking in that demonstration. However, demonstration is still of great value to us because it gives us an opportunity to see things in action and observe it firsthand, and just familiarize yourself with something that may be new coming on the market. The thing that we have to remember that is any information beyond that observation of looking at something in action is not appropriate for analyzing and saying this answers a question I have. So we have to be careful about demonstration plots. They definitely have value to them. We get an opportunity to firsthand see something in the field, but it is not the same thing as research. It is not designed to answer a pertinent question that may arise. Now, small plot versus on-farm research, and we get challenged with this frequently at the university level because a lot of our small plot research is maybe done on a 50-foot length of row and maybe 4 rows wide. We do that for the soybean evaluations. We do that for the corn evaluations. We do that for the wheat trials. A lot of the insect trials and disease trials may be done on a small plot basis. And the purpose for doing that, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is we can get better uniformity of a condition that we're trying to test something against. And we can feel more comfortable that, yes, we're getting an even exposure of our crop to what we're examining. In the on-farm situation, we're looking more toward the real-life situation, where we have variability in a field as we go greater lengths across the field, to see if that information that was generated on that small plot carries over onto larger field scale areas. Small plot allows us to do multiple treatments that you could no way replicate all of them on a on-farm scale. Now, because on an on-farm scale, we're covering greater amounts of land, and you will run out of land very quickly if you try to replicate an entire small plot research on an on-farm scale. So we have to be selective as to what treatments were examined in the small plot to carry over into the on-farm situation. Again, the other thing that we can do on that small plot type of research area is we can have very specialized equipment to get a specific treatment out there into the field. Whereas when we're doing the on-farm type of research, we're using the equipment that's available to us, the planter, the sprayer, the tractor, the harvester. Everything is at a much larger size. So we have to keep that in mind as we design any kind of research that we are trying to accomplish. Why do growers like on-farm research? Well, in the case of the farmer that's actually doing it, they can feel more comfortable in believing the results because they had that first-hand involvement in it and know how it was accomplished and how it got there. It is usually much closer to a particular farm. Now, we have research farms scattered around the state, but one of the closest ones to here is in Hoytville or Custer, Ohio, which is a pretty good distance from our backyard here, or your backyard, wherever it may be. So you may not feel that it's quite as comparable. Now, obviously, even within a county border, you can be in the southeast corner of a county and you may not get any kind of significant weather pattern. And just on the northwest corner of the county, they may be getting a deluge of rain. So those weather patterns can be significantly different from one place to the other. And so we're looking at soil types, rainfall, equipment management practices, a whole bunch of other things that can more closely reflect what you do on the farm. And if it's if it's initiated by the farmer themselves, or at least the purpose for even considering on-farm research is because you have a question and you want that question answered. And so it's more personal to the individual that's getting involved in that research. Now, there's some tricks to that, and we'll look at some of that as we go along here. And the first trick is formulating a good question to attempt to answer on the farm. Now, what kind of questions would you have on your farm that you think you might want to get involved with research? Anything? Yeah. Hello? Are we still out there? Obviously, you have questions. What kind of questions might you have? You're at a no-till conference. If you're not practicing no-till, one of the questions may be, will no-till work on my kind of farm? Or hybrid questions. You see the university varietal trials, and you see a whole bunch of different varieties there. Any of them are yours, any of them not yours. So you may see things that are missing out of those research trials that you would like to see examined. Fertility rates, population rates. There's all kinds of straightforward questions that could be asked and answered potentially if we design that research appropriately. So that's the very first thing that we have to consider. What is the question that we're trying to answer? And then before you even take the tractor out of the barn with a planter, you need to ask yourself, do we have the ability to answer that question? Can we actually design a research type of trial that will get to the answer that we think we can get to? So that's a real critical step in that. The next thing is, once you have thought about your question and you think you're ready to move forward with it, then you have to decide how many treatments are you willing to examine. And when you're designing research for on the farm, when you're looking at treatments, every time you add another treatment to your list, you have to think of how much more land is that going to require to be able to examine that on the farm. How many treatments minimally must you look at? And you've already seen a couple of times, if you were in the room here earlier, they were looking at nitrogen rates. And they suggested minimum number of nitrogen rates one should look at to design a research is at least 4. And one of those 4 is 0 added nitrogen. Now, sometimes that's going to be kind of hard to swallow, of not putting nitrogen on a portion of your farm where you're trying to grow corn. And you may very well expect to see a reduction in the potential yield out of there. When you're doing on-farm research, you will have to accept that at times that you're going to lose yields in part of that field. But if you don't have that check, or if you don't have that 0 treatment in there, you will not be completely certain that you're seeing effect of any other treatment that you test. Now, nitrogen, fertilizer, that can be a really challenging thing to look at because you have natural nitrogen in that field if you have any organic matter. Because that organic matter can break down and add nitrogen to your system. That's why you have to have that zero check in there. If you don't have that zero check, you don't know how much is naturally coming from your soil. Now, the other thing tricky about nitrogen is it is incredibly critical to have moisture available in the soil. And if you run into a summer where you have a very droughty situation, it doesn't matter how much nitrogen you add into that system. If you don't have the ability to get it into solution so it will be taken up by a plant, it's never going to get into plant. On the other hand, if you have a beautiful summer, a summer where the rain comes on such a timely schedule, an inch a week or a half an inch a week, such that there's always moisture available in that field, that moisture availability can easily override just about any nitrogen deficiency that you might have in that field, because it will keep all the nitrogen easily available to the plant. So that's kind of a confounding factor that you have to be aware of. The replicated trial that you have down here, that's always a good idea to sketch out where you, and how you see your treatments being laid out in the field. And keep that diagram once you have established it. And marking in a field where you're going to put that treatment is also very critical. When it comes to once you've got the information collected, how you handle that information is also going to be exceedingly critical. As a human, we have very easily slip into biasnesses if we just look at it subjectively and looking at it with our own mind and seeing a large number versus a low number and saying, hey, I got a better result with this one up here because it has a higher number versus a lower number down here. If you just look at it on that way without doing any kind of mathematical, statistical analysis, you're going to err frequently. Guaranteed, you're going to err frequently. So we need to take that internal biasness away from ourselves and rely upon that statistical analysis to help us understand what we're seeing in that data. And we'll come back to that one in a bit. And then, there are potentially other things that we may see come along with that research, but drawing those conclusions after 1 year without statistical analysis, it can really lead us astray. Because from 1 year to the next, it could be very different. And without that mathematical analysis of the data, we could very easily fall into a trap. Now, the title of the presentation is Follow the K.I.S.S Rule whenever you're thinking about doing on-farm research. And our gentleman up here with a question mark looking at that flow chart there, this is what we see most of the time in administrative level types of thought patterns. Who do you refer to? It can get quite confusing every time you add another level or another factor into a situation. And we want to avoid types of situations like that where it's so convoluted we can't make any sense out of it at all. So what is K.I.S.S? What does that stand for? I'm sure everybody's heard it. What is K.I.S.S? And there it is. Keep it simple, stupid. Now that sounds kind of derogatory. You tell somebody, keep it simple, stupid. It almost sounds like you're insulting the person and calling them stupid. But that's not really where that comes from. And we'll come back to that in a second. There's a lot of derivations of this acronym. There's things like keep it simple, silly, keep it short and simple, keep it simple and straightforward, keep it small and simple. And actually, all of this was originated in the Navy. In the 1960s, The Navy, well, oh, what I jumped forward here too far. Yeah, there we go. I must have been leaning on the button. But it originated in the Navy, and it was directed toward Navy engineers. Now, engineers are smart people, so they weren't calling their engineers stupid. What they were calling their engineers, or challenging their engineers with, was design what we need, but make it as simple as possible so you can very easily repair it if necessary. Keep it simple and stupid enough that anybody off the street can come in there and deal with it. So that's kind of the idea behind that. We're looking at keeping things simple, because if you keep things simple, it's easier to analyze and understand rather than getting complicated. And we can take this right into on-farm research. And I can, as an anecdotal example of that, I had somebody come to me that had this whole ream of data. And they said, we did a tremendous on-farm research project, and I want you to help us analyze the data so we can say we did statistical analysis on it and that our answers were justified by that statistical analysis. And so we sat down and we started plugging the data into a statistical package that I had. Simple, straightforward. The first set of data popped out the average of the different treatments and made a comparison. Yes, there was a statistical significant difference between them. Then he started giving me the data for the next treatment or the next research project they did. We're going down through the list. And suddenly I started seeing coding that was almost identical, if not identical, to the coding that was given to me in the first round of data. And I started looking at it and said, oh, it's my imagination. We went on to the third one, and dang, if those same things didn't start showing up again. And I stopped and said, what's going on here? I think I've seen this code at least 3 different times for these 3 different research projects that you were doing. And they said, oh, yeah, it's the same data. And I was like, what? He said, yeah, one experiment went north and south. A second experiment went east and west. And a third experiment also went north and south over the same area in the field. So there were at least 3 different research projects occurring on the same small piece of ground. And they thought they could simply ignore the results of the other treatments and examine one treatment at a time. And it's like, no, you can't do that. You've made it so complicated that everything you've done is worthless, because you have 3 different treatments on the same little piece of ground, and you can't tell me which of those treatments actually caused the results that you are getting to. So when we complicate things like that and keep on adding another factor and another factor and another factor, you are going to get so deep into things that it's going to mean absolutely nothing. And you've wasted time, you've wasted effort, and you've wasted money doing that. So keep it simple. The more simple it is, the easier you can get information back out of there that truly means something to you. Other things, limit your treatments or your factors that you're looking at to 1 at a time, or at most 2 at a time, because you can handle that and we can separate that out more easily. Consider whether there are other factors that can need to be controlled, and can you control them? If you can't control them, again, you lose out on that one. And the results, when you're looking at those results, you got to consider what could have been confounding factors, what could have interfered with your results. Just like I was saying with those nitrogen types of research trials, weather is going to confound those results almost every year, and you have to be aware of it. If you have a droughty year, then it's going to influence the availability of your nitrogen. If you have a nice moist year, it's going to make that nitrogen that much more available. So you always have to consider what else could be causing the results that we're seeing that weren't the factors that we were actually looking at. All right, research trials do require a lot of time. You've got to be committed. And a challenge or a pitfall that we can fall into with some of these research trials is you go to the field, you plant the plot, you put the treatment on. And the next time you go to that plot is when you run the harvester through it. You can't do research that way. You have to be there regularly to see what's happening throughout the entire season, to catch those confounding factors that may have occurred that influence the results of your project more than what your treatment actually did. So, and again, the more complex those trials are, the more time, energy, and money that you have put into them. A poorly planned research trial is worthless, or could potentially be worthless. And so you don't want to do that. If you're really committed to doing research on the farm, do it right. And if you need help, help is available. Almost every extension educator that's involved with agriculture and sometimes even horticulture, they are incredibly willing to assist you in designing and implementing a research trial so that it's done correctly. Setting up or selecting your treatments, again, limit the number of different treatments. You want a significant number, a number that really will tell you something, and that's where the planning comes in, but make sure they're feasible to be accomplished. And always include a control or a check. If you don't have that control or check in there, how do you know what you're comparing to? So that control may be a zero additive control, or it may be the standard practice that would normally be carried out on those fields. So you have to consider which of those you want. Experimental design. All right, here's the tough one. In those designs, the simplest is going to be a 2-treatment research project where you have your control and you have a simple treatment. And there, it's going to take up a lot less ground and a lot less time and a lot less materials. But the other thing is randomizing where those treatments fall on the ground. Now, where that becomes so critical is if you think about especially our fields around here, most of our fields around here are tiled. And they are typically tiled on a very consistent basis. There might be 30 feet between tile, or there might be 40 feet between tile. But because of that regular positioning of those tiles, if your treatments follow the direction of the tile, if you're not careful, in a 2-treatment type of experiment, 1 treatment may consistently fall over top of those tiles. And the other treatment may consistently fall between those tiles simply because of the size of your equipment. Now, what does that do? Well, on a very wet year, where would you expect to see the best growth of your crops? Where do you see that? Over top of the tile. And I can guarantee you can go down any road and you can see up and down, up and down, and up and down. And if you don't take that into account by randomizing the position of your treatments, it will influence the results of your trial. And if you can, include a number of different treatment levels to get a better answer. Always on those on-farm research trials, look at your equipment that you have available to you. Do you have small combines? Do you have medium-sized combines? Do you have monster combines? And you have to match your treatments to the size of the equipment that you are working with. So if you end up with a treatment that's only 15 feet wide and you have a 30-foot header that you're trying to run through that field, you're going to have a difficult time separating your treatments from one another. Combines, sprayers, planters, every piece of equipment that might go on to that research area needs to be taken into consideration. Randomization and replication, it's a must. You can't just go on a side-by-side treatment where half a field's compared to the other half of the field because there's way too much variation that goes in there. Looking at your location, and then finally, whenever you do put your plot out there, you need to put a border all the way around that plot. because edge effects can influence the results of those treatments.